Hey, how's it going? This is Brian with Grow Food SA. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to build a garden bed, and most importantly how to use sheet mulching, which is also known as the lasagna method. And just as that would suggest, you're basically building these layers of organic matter that are going to decompose and work towards a living soil and kind of create a lot of biology in the soil and nutrients in the soil that the plants really need. One of the most basic ways to do it is, like, if you're building a pathway, I just lay down cardboard right over the grass and then I put in really thick layers of mulch. If you're going to be building something like a garden area or a bed or somewhere where you're going to be planting a lot of things, it's sometimes good to try to modify those layers and kind of add more back and forth of nitrogen and carbon materials. And basically those layers are referred to sometimes as the greens and the browns, but basically the greens are nitrogen layers and then the browns are carbon layers. So one of the more complex kind of like ways of doing it is basically really kind of intensive back and forth, the layering of carbon and nitrogen materials. So you would have your soil and then you would have your grass growing, and then you would cut that grass really short and you would apply soil amendments over it. That can be like ash, lime, green sand. Then you can take like a small layer of manure, that's going to be your green nitrogen layer. Then you do a small layer of cardboard, that's going to be kind of your biodegradable weed barrier, and that's only about 1.5 inches also. And then your nitrogen, another nitrogen layer, if you can find something, kitchen scraps or something like that, that'd be another 1.5 inches to 1 inch. And then you go really chunky with this layer of carbon. That could be things like leaves or hay or mulch. Then you go with another layer of compost, and that's going to be more a nitrogen layer again. That's going to have a lot of manure and biodegraded material in that. And then on top of all your compost or all your stuff, you want to add mulch. So we'll be reviewing that a little bit today, so check it out. So just real quickly, always keep in mind whenever you're working, if you're doing manures like this for your nitrogen layer, you want to make sure that those layers stay as low to the bottom and safely away from the plants, because these are still going to be decomposing. Whenever they decompose, those microbes tend to get too hot and they can burn the roots of plants. So as we say, we want to keep the stuff that's really going to be decomposing, like high nitrogen stuff like that, often kind of away from the plants, unless it's already composted. That compost can be on the top layer and you can plant in that, but these you can't. So if you don't have access to manure and things like that, you know, if you can let the grass grow really tall in that area and just chop all that grass and let that grass lay, you know, and all those weeds and stuff like that, and that gives you a good little layer that'll start breaking down, and there you can build on top of that as well. So you're going to want to gather cardboard, and usually I try to stick to large sheets of cardboard. I go to like large manufacturers, so that'll be like furniture stores or appliance stores. And even if the cardboard has these inks on it, these are usually soy-based inks. And so what you want to do is you want to start off just by removing a lot of the tape that's on there. You can wet the cardboard and that kind of makes the tape not stick as much. And you also want to try to, if there's any staples that are holding the box together, you want to try to remove those. You can basically just cut out that piece that has the staples on it. You can use smaller sheets of cardboard, but you're just going to have to overlap a lot more. But you get your cardboard, and even if it has print on it, the blacks, the red, the yellow inks, a lot of these inks are soy-based inks. The only thing you want to try to avoid is sometimes they'll be like, if you buy a new TV or something like that, it'll have like either a sticker, a glossiness to it, or it'll just have that image printed on there. But if it's glossy, that usually contains like a plastic on it, so you want to avoid those. So here's some staples. Yeah, the easiest way is just to remove that whole line of staples, cutting them out. That, and you can kind of just remove that whole line like that. And so whenever you're laying out your beds, you want to make sure that you map up the square that you want to put your beds over. And I usually do 2 feet for the pathway, and then the beds are usually about 4 feet of the actual bed, and then you can kind of make it out further than that, 8 feet or 10 feet for the length, but the width of it is usually about 4 feet because the average stretch is about 2 feet. So that means that you can stretch on both sides and be able to reach the center of the bed. Whenever you're laying out these cardboard sheets, what you want to make sure is that they overlap at least 6 inches or so, because this is going to be the most vulnerable spot. Grass can still kind of grow up through here and come around that. To make sure this cardboard lays down flat, we'll start adding a bunch of water, and that'll soak this cardboard and allow it to start kind of not being as structurally stiff and start to kind of flex to the ground that's here. And you can build this right on top of the grass. You just cut the grass as low as you can, and then we'll start building this over, and we'll build our layers on top of that. If you have open seams like this where the cardboard box was folding, you want to make sure that this is covered here. This is an open, vulnerable kind of spot here that grass can breach on through, so you want to put cardboard underneath there. You can do about 1 layer, but sometimes 2 layers is also most effective. So you can already see how just wetting some of the cardboard really starts to form it down and makes those seams start to seal a lot better. Whenever we start adding some of those layers on top of that, you're really going to be able to press that down and make those seams really good. If you have any extra cardboard left over, maybe make sure you go over any vulnerable spots. There's always sometimes situations where there's potentially a hole, you know, in the cardboard, like over here. So we'll use extra cardboard that we can and try to cover that section there. When working with some of the boards, you want to buy untreated wood. You don't want to work with things that might have potential contaminants in it. Cedar is also an option to use. I like working with these because these are thick enough to kind of last for a couple of years. I wouldn't recommend using fence boards or anything thin like that. That might only last for about a year. So go with something that's thick and bulky so that you get a couple of years out of it. So to make the beds, we're working with 2x10s, which actually measure to 1.5 to 9 inch, and 4x4s for the corners to help screw into. To cut the 4x4s, cut them in half, and then I'll flip it over and cut the other side off there. You could buy just as long as you want to make your bed. So these are 8 foot, and then it's going to be 4x8s. As we said, 4 is the ideal width. So you can take one of these 8 foots, cut them in half, and that gives you your 4, and then you got your post here. Whenever you're cutting, you can use various saws. I like using the circular saw. Just a couple things to keep in mind when working with that is you got your safety button up here. So that is always held with their thumb, and then you're able to use the trigger over here with your thumb held onto that. See if you can see that there, like that. That allows it to start kind of rolling. As you cut through the wood, it'll pull back the guard that's on there. And just make sure that you cut at a speed that the blade is cutting at. You don't want to force through the cut. You want to cut slow enough to where it feels like the saw is cutting through the wood and you're not pushing it on through. Alright, so building the beds, we take the 4 foot for the width of it, and then we run down our 8 foot long. And the main thing you got to keep in mind is however you do it, you want to make sure that this pattern is replicated on all of them. So if this 4 foot is on the inside and then the 8 foot is on the outside, you want to make sure that you continue that pattern on all your squares. You put your 4x4 in there and you just screw right into the 4x4 instead of screwing into the edge of the 2x6 or 2x10 here. You're able to get a lot more wood to screw into, and it's going to prevent the chances of rot happening over here and rotting out the area where your screw's holding in. I usually use, you can use a regular drill gun. This is an impact driver, and I use 2.5 inch, or you can do 3 inch. These are deck screws. They have a coating on them that helps preserve them. If it's got a unique head on it, sometimes it'll come with its own little drill bit in there too. The other thing you want to keep in mind is make sure that your walkways are at least 2 feet or longer. That allows a wheelbarrow to go through, and kind of still enough space for a person to walk through. And you want to lay this on top of the cardboard, and then you can start with your bags of leaves and mulch on top of the cardboard, and we'll get on to that one. One thing I want to show you here is this conveyor belt that has a cranking arm here. So you can put this arm in, attach the conveyor belt onto your truck, and you just crank the arm, and it just moves all of the material right off to the edge, and then you can just bring it into the wheelbarrow. So this is only a $40 attachment that you can buy, and I think it's well worth it. It definitely saves my back from having to unload loads of materials from my truck. Whenever you got your load, all you have to do is with this arm, you just crank it. Just like that. Falls right on in. Yeah, so that's back saver. Alright, so after we put mulch down in the pathways here, you always want to make sure that you apply the mulch as heavy as you can, because this is on the pathways. You're doing like a basic sheet mulch. It's just basically cardboard down here as your weed barrier, and then as much mulch as you can lay down. So you don't want to go any less than maybe 2 or 3 inches, because anything less will really allow pinholes of light to come through, and grasses and seeds and things like that will settle in. So the thicker the mulch, the better of a weed barrier that's going to be. That's the most basic kind of sheet mulching. Whenever we start going into using it in a garden bed, I like to build it up more like the lasagna layer, lasagna method of sheet mulching, which is basically kind of making layers of biological kind of material, compostable material, and building that up. And it's a combinations of greens and browns. And right here we're working with mulch at the bottom too, because this kind of follows what's called this German technique called hugelkultur, where basically you'll make mounds with logs in the center of it. This kind of follows that concept, because instead of logs we just got shredded up wood as our thin base layer. And this one you don't really have to go that much on, because we really just want a thing that kind of brings in fungi into our beds to help with the living soil. So I'm only about 2 inches on this, and then I also incorporate some other organic matter like leaves that I gather, and so I'll kind of work these on into the layer, blend them together. And then since this is our carbon material, this is all of our browns, we really need a nitrogen. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in compost over the top of this for our green layer, our nitrogen based layer next. So yeah, just work this on in. It can be, there's some leaves that work better than others, and there's some wood that works better than others. We'll maybe kind of try to break that down in another video there. But most of the time, whatever you have access to easily is sometimes the better material. And so with all the layers that you add, it's good to just be watering, adding moisture into those layers. a lot of this stuff that's going to break down this material, the microbes and the fungi and the bacteria, really exist on a moist environment, and they can move within moisture and droplets of water and stuff like that. So just like whenever you're composting, you really kind of want a damp environment. So this will really help start the decomposition process as we come down. So always just watering in those layers. So you can add compost or garden soil. I really like compost because some of this has got manure or other green bin, kitchen scraps and stuff like that in there, so we know that it's got some good nitrogen-based materials in here. So this nitrogen-based materials help balance out some of all this carbon. So I put in a good layer of this, and you can kind of incorporate it into the layers a little bit more so that they're kind of integrated in, so they blend together. But you want to make sure you add maybe about 4 inches or more, and you can actually plant right on top of this as these other layers start to break down over the season. So if these things like these leaves might only be here for a couple of months, and then down to that mulch layer might break up by the end of the year. So that'll help add nutrients constantly to the soil as the garden continues to age. So after we got this compost layer on here, you can start planting seeds directly, sowing seeds directly into this bed. Or if you're going to buy seedlings, which are already kind of like seeds that have been planted at the nursery, and you just buy the plant itself and you're going to plant that in, then you can plant that in and add mulch right away. But if you're planting just from seed and your seed is going to grow out of this, you got to wait till the seed is at least kind of big enough, like maybe about 3 inches or so, so that you can eventually come in and start adding mulch around this. You always want to try to protect your soil and have mulch over it, especially here in South Texas, because that helps keep moisture in, and moisture helps keep the environment for a lot of the microbes that are in here. You'll feel that this stuff is like compost is like hot. It's got like temperature to it, and that's because those microbes are eating and they're actually generating like heat and stuff. So we want to protect them. This is what's making this a living soil here. So always protect it with mulch. You can use leaves, you can use wood mulch and things like that, but you just need to get it covered is the most important thing. So if you're doing seeds, you need to make sure that the plant gets big enough so that the mulch doesn't cover it up. Whenever you're watering, it'll knock that mulch around and it can cover up small plants. So make sure that the plant is kind of big enough to handle a mulch layer, but try to get the mulch on as soon as possible. If you got some bare spots open, maybe you're not planting in this corner, you got your small seeds over here, put some mulch down over here, you know, start covering the area and leaving little patches where your seedlings can grow or something like that. But try to cover this as soon as possible. So